I'm Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 103 of the Wheatley podcast. Thank you very much for joining us as usual, wherever you do. And thanks for listening to me ramble on last week about things like the seasonal affective disorder and what else did I do? Resolutions, things like that. I just thought I should come on and do the little solo thing because obviously I have guests on all the time, and it's nice to just kind of touch base as well because I don't know, sometimes I like to talk as well. But it was enjoyable. And I have had some people come back to me and talk about resolutions, and they are completely your own thing. If you like them, you do. And if you don't, you know, if you think they're destructive, you think they're rewarding, that's okay too. I was trying to bring balanced opinion, but I think I did fall on the side of the not being great. But again, just my opinion. Listen, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you would. That would be excellent. We're obviously visual over there, so it's even better. But listen, we'll get into our episode this week. I want to introduce our guest, Eva Wall, who is a blogger and a book lover. How are you doing, Eva?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. We were just talking about this before. We're on it's a Saturday morning. It's 8:30. It's a brilliant time. You apologized for dragging me out of bed, but that is wrong. If I could get everybody to come on at this point, it would be perfect for me.
Well, glad to hear it. I like the early morning as well.
So don't feel guilty about that. I love it. Everybody come on. In for future guests, actually, 8:30 is the perfect time for me to do a podcast. Eva, we'll start as we always do. Could you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Dublin, suburban Dublin. One sister. Well, I'm the oldest. And yeah, I mean, I had a very, very happy childhood, I suppose. Yeah, would have gone to Irish schools and loved them. Loved school growing up, and yeah, just very, very uneventful but happy.
Good. Irish schools, yeah. It's again. We all look back and wish we could speak Irish. For the people who don't speak Irish, I think we wish we could speak Irish. You think that was very valuable to you?
Yeah, well, I probably took it for granted at the time, to be honest, because I mean, you don't know any better when you're whatever it is, 4 or 5 going into school. And to be honest, my parents, like, their Irish should be okay. They're not massively into it. They're not big Gael goers. It was mainly just that it was kind of the closest school. But now I really, really appreciate it. I think being bilingual is really valuable. I'm now teaching kids up at that school, at the same school in Irish, and it just adds something different. It's good for your head, and it's just also such a beautiful language and heritage, and I think it's so important to sort of promote. I know some people do regret not having Irish and would love to improve it, and I think that's a great thing as well for people to try and do that.
For sure. I was talking to a person the other day who's English, and they live very close to the Gaeltacht, and they love the sound of the Irish language, and it is one of those things that maybe growing up, learning it, possibly not in the best place, but I did not grasp onto it. That's the best way of putting it. But I think, you know, when you hear someone say it back to you who's not from here, and they say how beautiful language it is, you kind of appreciate it more. Even if you turn on TG Carr, for instance, and you hear someone talk it in such a flowing, fluent way, it is a really a nice language. And being bilingual as well, you know, especially growing up, you know, you are able to grasp onto other languages as well, and you're going to learn French and German in school anyway. And I think it could only lead to kind of a positive thing really for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I think especially with Irish, there's a real richness and specificity, I suppose, to the Irish language, particularly when it comes to kind of the world around us. There's writers who've written about that. Like most recently, I read Kerry Ducathy's memoir, Thin Places. Kerry grew up in Derry, and so wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn Irish in school, and took it upon herself to teach herself Irish kind of later in life because and word by word, kind of words for natural phenomena or plants or animals or anything that she saw around her, and she felt that it gave her a deeper connection to the land around her, and it kind of grounded her. And I just think that's a really valuable insight on the Irish language. Someone who wasn't born to it, or wasn't born who was born in Ireland but wasn't born learning Irish, and who wasn't kind of brought up to hate it in the leaving cert system that we have. And I just think if more people looked at Irish that way, it would promote the language, and it's kind of important environmentally, I think, as well, to have that attitude to our landscape and the world around us.
Yeah, for sure. And I also do think that there is a kind of a fall off point from when you start to learn Irish in primary school, and it's something that you dislike immediately. It does lead to you disliking other languages. Then you think, oh, I have to do French or I have to do Spanish, whatever it might be in that school. And that's a shame as well, because again, it opens it up, especially when you're talking with someone who's something as universal as Spanish, like it does open it up to other things. So I do, yeah, it's great. You know, I have spoken to a couple of people who have kids, and they would like to go to Irish schools just for, well, not just for that reason, but that's a major part of it. So like, hopefully, I always hope for a resurgence of it. I look, I'm one of those people who always says, yeah, I'd like to learn it. Why don't I just learn it? It's like, if I tell myself I'd like to learn, just do it. But look, I have many things that I need to learn. One is to be quiet and let the guest speak. But anyway, so our second question, Eva, is always, when did you first become aware of mental health?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question. It's an interesting one, and one that I couldn't sort of pinpoint exactly. Although I suppose, I mean, I'm 25, so the Ireland I grew up in, there mightn't have been as much of a stigma around mental health as there had been before, but there definitely still was. Like when I was a child, my only concept of mental health was if it was poor, and if someone had poor mental health, then they were crazy. And that's so negative and so wrong, and it leads you to, even as a child when you don't fully understand things, it leads you to sort of police yourself, I think, maybe for any sort of sign that you might be wrong in some way or crazy in some way. And then I guess when I was a teenager, you realize the complexity of it so much more. It's not black and white. It's not sane or crazy. It's, you know, people have different struggles at different times, different kinds of struggles at different times. And yeah, again, I guess you still push against it as a teenager, maybe, because, sorry, I think my sister might be rattling around up there.
That's all. Don't worry about that. There'll be plenty of noises this end as well.
Yeah, and you still push against it, and you're still wanting to sort of be what you see as, you know, quote unquote normal. And probably only in kind of the last 5 years would I've been much more accepting of the fact that, you know, it's quite fluid, people's mental health. People don't just struggle with their mental health or not. People have different issues at different times. Someone who has never struggled with their mental health before, something might happen, something might change, or something might not. They might just enter a dark period of their lives for no reason, a scary period of their lives for no reason. And that we all need to kind of learn to deal with that and be tolerant of it.
I think what you kind of touched on there is really interesting, and it's one that
she's just burst in there now.
That's all right. I'll continue talking. It's okay. But I think what I see is, as you know, as a teenager, you might not notice this, but I think you notice it as you maybe go into your 20s, is that it's not just bad, the mental health side of things. You know, it's bad, poor mental health and good mental health. And the thing is, if you do have good mental health, it's about maintaining that good mental health, and it's something that you do need to be proactive with. It's not something that you just can allow. Okay, I feel grand now, and I can just go and do what I want and be, you know, almost destructive in a way. And this is something we are going to touch on throughout this episode, about how reading is something that does that. Like, whether it helps someone with poor mental health or helps someone with good mental health, reading is something that's very, very powerful for that. And I find it very powerful. And look, we'll chat to you about it as well. And what I wanted to talk about really, when you were a child, you know, do you remember at what point you started becoming a reader? Was it something that was within the family that you kind of took up from your parents and kind of bled down into that?
Yeah, very much so. I don't really remember not reading, if that makes sense. I think I picked it up quite early. I get it because my parents both be big readers. So it was something that was in the family and something that was encouraged very much. And then when I enjoyed it, it was they ran with it, kind of thing. So I don't really remember not reading, and I was sort of that child who'd take a book everywhere and who'd kind of be borderline antisocial with reading. Yeah, uh, that's forgivable when you're a child, not so
Yeah.
much later. Um, yeah, I can't remember a time when I wasn't reading, and when I wasn't reading sort of voraciously. But then when I was a teenager, I still would have read. I would still always have had a book on the go, but it would have sort of fallen off at different times, maybe for different reasons.
I
Um,
Sorry, go on.
just like now I would always have kind of even 3 or 4 books on the go.
Mm.
It's a real outlet for me.
There's a thing that people talk about. I think, I suppose we'll use Roald Dahl because, of his, something that's so major still in our culture. It's still being made into films and still people talking about it. But the side of imagination that you have as a kid when you're reading something like that, it's huge. I found something only recently, I think maybe in the last 10 years, we'll say, that there was a gap where I didn't, or I couldn't get into that kind of imagination. Reading books now, I'm not talking about Roald Dahl at this point, but when I'm reading books now, I can get back into that where like, obviously it's a form of escapism, but getting into that fantasy world, or, whether it's collections of short stories or novels or whatever it is. Have you managed to carry that over from childhood into now?
That's a really interesting question, actually. I think that capacity to lose yourself in a story, I don't know if it can ever be totally recovered. It's a real
Mm,
loss, and you can't really pinpoint at what stage in your life it happens. It's probably
yeah.
different for everyone, um, and it's something you'd really mourn. Like, I mean, I would. I don't think, like I say, I can't pinpoint when it happened, but if I could, I'd always be kind of denying it. That, oh
Mm,
no, I definitely can still um, be that immersed in a book. I can definitely still exert my imagination in that
mm,
kind of a way. I don't think to the same extent a child's imagination is something wonderful. Like, it's
yeah.
so elastic. Um, it's so unself-centered. I think is actually
Yeah.
what the real thing about it is. The child loses themselves. Like, they're not thinking about their own life. They're not thinking about what's
Mm,
going on with them. They are fully immersed in the story, and maybe in their mind's eye they can picture themselves standing alongside their favorite characters, whether that's on a pirate ship or a spaceship or whatever. But it's not about them. um and that, I think, is what you struggle to lose as an adult reader, or struggle to achieve as an adult reader, is to forget yourself. And sometimes, I mean, why would you want to forget yourself? Sometimes books resonate with you because of your own experience, or because of your relation to them, and that's very specific to you and very personal to you. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does register as a loss. I think you do feel that. It reminds me of Peter Pan. At the start of Peter
mm,
Pan, Jane Barry talks about Neverland, and he describes Neverland, and he talks about its shores being somewhere that once you reach adulthood, you'll never see them
mm.
again. And it's a real loss, but it's also part of growing up, I suppose. And it's a
Yeah.
wonder to watch it still happen in smaller children.
Yeah, and look, I get the idea that when a child is reading, the stuff that's going on around them isn't quite as intense as what's going on around with adults. And I talk when I talk about like art, I always try to throw in music, books, films as kind of the three things that I really love. And I suppose when I'm talking about fiction now, I, I I try to set the scene for reading now. Whereas it was like cramming stuff in and just here, there, and everywhere. But the phone is going off. There's something happening on the TV maybe is on mute. I'm very bad for having TV on mute in the corner, which is distracting. Um, but now I can kind of find a spot, like find a place where I can kind of immerse myself in the story. Now, sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes the story is a bit too much for you. Um, but there's times when I allow myself to get into those characters, and it's really rewarding, but it does feel that kind of that youth aspect, which was back, in for me back in the 90s and 80s, even the late 80s. And I do find myself just being a little bit more allowing myself to get into that fiction. And I do, like, I think for me, I just wanted to mention actually really about my parents, like, because they passed this down to me, reading. And my mom is really big into fiction and my dad's really big into nonfiction. Now he swaps, and I remember he was reading Da Vinci Code. I've never heard someone so annoyed about a book in all my life. But he's very into biographies. He's very into current affairs, historical stuff like that. And obviously, my mom with the fiction, and that's so important to pass on to kids, the joy of it. And obviously, they feel that joy when they're young. But if we could move it along into when they're maybe into the teenage years, and things like Harry Potter help with that, I think. I've seen the films, I haven't read the books, but when you see it's very easy to kind of sneer at people who are in their 20s who like Harry Potter, but that was a journey for them that no doubt led to other writers and other pieces of fiction. And it's kind of good to see that those things led to. I'm just using Harry Potter as an example. There's many examples, Lord of the Rings, all those kind of things. Is there actually? Were you a Harry Potter fan? Did you follow like a certain character's arc?
That's a funny one, actually. And I totally agree with you. And it is very easy to sneer at people who are still very into Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or even Disney films and things like that. But it is such a precious thing to you, whatever you had during your childhood and whatever, still awakens some kind of magic for you, I guess.
Yeah.
I was very into Harry Potter. I was introduced to it very young, actually, because was it 2001 that the first film came out? So I was 5, and my dad took my 2 older cousins to see it and refused to take me because I was too young, and I kicked up a storm. So my grandmother secretly bought me the book.
Lovely.
As a little act of rebellion. So I started reading it then, and would have followed it, getting all the new books as they came out and watching the films as well. And yeah, I think I was also very into Enid Blyton as a child, who has aged less well, but I still think some of her stories have a lot of value for kids. She's just the sense of magic, like the Faraway Tree, and even some of the school stories and all that kind of thing. And I would have been into Tolkien and Philip Pullman, the Northern Lights trilogy. But yeah, Harry Potter was. I think there's something about it. It is just a world that seemed to capture and enchant so many children of a certain generation, and still continues to do so.
Yeah.
I think children who are introduced to it now, as far as I can tell, still seem to love it, and adults who were introduced to it that long ago are also still enchanted by it. And that's a really, for all that J.K. Rowling has fallen from grace now, and maybe rightly in some ways, but that's still an amazing achievement to have had. I obviously cliche would have related to Hermione a bit, because I was a bit of a best girl in class type situation, or I thought I was anyway. Although I'd say less courageous than Hermione. I definitely wouldn't have done some of the things she did. I would prefer to stay in my bed, I'd say. But yeah, no, Harry Potter was a real milestone, I think, and a generational milestone.
Yeah.
People my age and older and younger. So.
Yeah, and like I say, I try not to, judge, sneer at people like that. I find it hard with the superhero thing, but it's just the tights and the thing, I'm not going to go in. I've already said too much, because I say it too much on this podcast about that. So what was the reason that you wanted to start a blog and talk about books?
Yeah, it's interesting. I studied English and history in my undergrad, and then I did a master's in American literature, and I was sort of all geared up to go on and do a PhD and try and pursue a career in academia, and I just found it all very cloistered. It was a real kind of ivory tower situation. It was very divorced from reality, and it was sort of sucking the joy out of books in some ways. Now I'd still have close friends who are in academia, and they're like doing PhDs on literature and things like that, and I don't think that they're sucking the joy out of books. I think there's a real value to academic criticism, particularly if it's kind of political or social in its inclination. But I guess when I decided against doing the PhD then, and I felt a little bit lost in what I was going to do, the fundamental thing of how much I enjoyed books and how much I love books and how much I love talking about books was something I sort of wanted to get back to, and the blog gave me the opportunity to do that. And I mean, the reviews I write are crazy long, crazy long, and I doubt anybody reads the full thing, but it's sort of like, you know, it's a little repository for me, an archive of what I have read and what I've thought about books. Because one of the things that frustrates me the most, talking about superheroes, if I could have a superpower, it would be to remember every book that I've ever read in good detail. It annoys me so much when I start to forget them. And then I didn't sort of expect anyone to read them. I doubt anyone still reads them in their long form. I hope they don't, because everyone has better things to be doing with their time. But people kind of responded to the shorter Instagram captions or to stories, you know, videos and things. And yeah, it's a real sort of community online now. Not my page specifically. There is a bit of that, but more book bloggers generally. It's a pretty safe corner of the internet.
Yeah, that's very important, as we know. But I do. I've read some of them, and I've obviously watched the videos. But I really like long form reviews of things that I've read. Just on maybe the chance that I've missed something in it, and maybe, you know, just different perspectives on art is always a fascinating thing for me anyway, because we all see things differently. So kind of going off that then, Eva, like when you, someone that you really like, an author that you really like, writes a book, and this is always hard for me as well, because I would have examples in literature and film, like, you've loved this author for so long and they write a book and you're kind of like not sure about it. Is it hard to be unbiased when you're writing a review like that?
Yeah, I think it is. I sometimes, I mean, a lot of my favorite authors are dead, so they're not producing new things. But a lot of my favorite authors, particularly Irish authors, are very much alive and well. And prolific, and it sounds funny, but yeah, I do have a real personal investment in when they bring something new out. I get nervous for them, and nervous for myself that if I don't enjoy this as much, or if I feel that this isn't as good as the last thing, will I stop enjoying their work as much? Will it taint their work for me? Now that actually, I can't really think of an example of someone that has happened to me. Certainly not anyone living. But yeah, you do get, I suppose there's a bit of a confirmation bias as well, kind of, right? So like, I mean, if I think of Kevin Barry, for instance, one of my favorite writers, every time I start a new book of his or start a book of his that I haven't read before, I go into it knowing I'm going to love it.
Yeah.
And so that probably does make me love it more, but also he is incredible. So, you know, it like, but it does, I find writing reviews is interesting. I write very few negative reviews, if I'm honest. Sometimes a book annoys me so much. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is an example of that. I don't feel bad saying it, because, you know, I'm not going to damage its sales, let's be real. That I feel the need to sort of rant about it and explain why I didn't like it. But I do tend to, if I don't enjoy a book, I won't really review it, because there's enough negative stuff out there, and really what I want to do is recommend books to people, not sort of warn them off books. But yeah, it can be difficult, and it can be very difficult not to sound like a fangirl, I think. Sometimes I will do that. I'll avoid reviewing the same author more than once, particularly if I really like their stuff, because I'm just going to say the same thing over and over again and just sound like I'm ingratiating myself. But yeah, it can be difficult, and I do get nervous.
Yeah, you couldn't have picked a perfect example there with Kevin Barry. Kevin Barry, for people who don't know, wrote a book called Beetlebone, and obviously it had to do with John Lennon, if he had lived. And I'm a very big Beatles fan. I'm a very big Kevin Barry fan, and I actually was nervous when I got that book into my hands, and I was kind of thinking, oh, please don't taint either of your reputations. But again, I was like you said about Kevin Barry, I was not surprised that it was an excellent read. He's just one of those people, and like, I'm a huge fan of short stories. He's one of the best short story writers out there, but like when he's doing long form as well, it's no less brilliant, you know. So he's a great example. Let me just read out an advert, Eva, and we will get back to it. Okay. Fusion Training Center, Monksland, Athlone, a place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts, and CrossFit. A great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Center or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Center, train like a warrior. That's we're flying in there now. New lighting and everything. It's spectacular looking. And I got a personal best yesterday on the rower, so I'm pretty happy with it.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I don't want to big myself up too much, but so there's not much to big myself up about. So I'm really happy when I get something. But Eva, you are training to become a teacher. What and when did you decide on that?
Quite recently.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm only in my first. It's a 2-year course now to train to be a secondary school teacher. So I've just finished my first semester. I'm just starting in placement now. And yeah, I'm training to be an English and history teacher. That's what I did in my undergrad. And I worked in, as I said, finished that master's and sort of moved away from, sort of fallen out of love with academia, really, if I'm honest. I got a job in digital journalism and I was working for a website for 2 years. And I enjoyed it and it was a really valuable experience and I learned a lot, but it was really difficult during the pandemic and working from home was really difficult. And, for a long, long stretch of time there was no good news.
Okay, yeah.
And so actually I found that really impacted on my mental health and I felt like I wasn't contributing beneficial things. I was contributing to, the news is obviously valuable. I was writing pieces that I was proud of, opinion pieces that I was proud of. But I just felt like I couldn't, it was a sort of morass of bad news that I was just contributing to, and a morass of hysteria as well, online hysteria and fear and anxiety and division. And I just wanted to move away from that to something maybe a bit more fundamental. Again, moving back to what I love and what I'm passionate about, which is English literature, but history as well, but more so English, and what I could do to contribute to that. If I wasn't going to go into academia, what could I do to contribute to that? And I've always really liked the company of teenagers, actually. I think they're really interesting. They're, I love small children as well, and I find them just hilarious and so entertaining and so insightful. But I could never teach someone to read. I just don't have that patience.
Yeah, okay.
That patience or that skill, to be honest. That I'm, all primary school teachers. And yeah, secondary school teaching. I had a really influential English teacher when I was in secondary school all through the 6 years. And I saw what a difference she could make to me. But as I was someone who loved reading, and I didn't need convincing. I was always going to love English. I was always going to do well at English, frankly, and I loved reading. But she sort of she converted people in my class who didn't have that love and who had a nervousness and a fear around English, a fear of failure, because the Leaving Cert definitely inculcates that among people. I like one of this gambling on what poet is going to show up is always a pet peeve of mine. The poets themselves are probably rotating rapidly in their graves. But anyway, and I just felt that was a way that I could maybe make a bit of a contribution, however small, and do something that I enjoyed. And yeah, I'm glad I did. I'm really enjoying it at the moment.
Great. I like even mentioning your teacher there, and I do remember teachers who really kind of stirred something in me with regards to something like English and something like history as well. Actually, those two subjects in particular. It wasn't just the content; it was the teacher. The way they taught it. You can tell when the teacher really cares about the subject that they're teaching, and that's so important. Whatever about the pressures that go along with junior cert, but obviously in particular the Leaving Cert, it's that what we get back off the teachers on the subjects that we love. You might go into it liking something, but the teacher can up that and raise it into something that you love, and it's so important to have teachers like yourself coming into it and teaching this English, because clearly you're in love with literature. Here's a question: at what point do you stop reading a bad book, or do you finish it?
I am as stubborn as a mule.
Okay.
So I always finish it.
Yeah.
And God, I have slogged through some real beasts. Even shorter ones, short or long. Like I struggle to finish One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But I suppose I'd always give the author the benefit of the doubt that maybe things will turn around, or maybe I'll end up liking it, or even if I don't, that I'll still get something from it. I think that's important. And yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm a very fast reader, and I get through a lot of books. And I don't say that to kind of big myself up. I say it as, for me, if I spend time reading a book I don't enjoy, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone has less time to read, or they find reading more difficult, or they find it, something that it takes them longer, if they struggle to get into it, don't waste your time on a book you're not enjoying.
Yeah, I kind of, it's such a hard, thing for me to if someone's excited about reading a book and they say, have you read it, and you really didn't like it, but it's not to say that person won't like it, and films is easier because it's an hour, or 2 hours, and what's 2 hours in the grand scheme of things. But in a book, I used this example before on here, but like Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, like after 100 pages, I really didn't like the book. And I'm like you, though. Again, stubbornness brought me through it, because it's good, actually, what you said there. You might get something from it. You might learn something from it. And I didn't from that book, but that's that's probably my One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, by the sounds of things. Is Midnight's Children. It's really interesting because you mentioned One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I read the book. I can't really remember it. Obviously, the film stands out more to me because I've seen it more, and I really do like the film. I don't know if the portrayal of mental health is the very best in it, but and then you kind of go back to look. Well, it was made in the 70s. They didn't have as much cop on or education about the whole thing, so you're trying to give it a little bit of leeway. But I don't remember the book. It's one of those ones that it's just I have it. I probably won't read it again now, but it's one of those. There's always one that stands out, I guess.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I haven't seen the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I sort of need to do that because it has such a cult following, and from what I gather, it is much better than the book, and it sort of avoids some of the kind of misogyny and racism that the book has. And I mean, now they've made that series, Ratched, is that what it's called?
That's right, yeah.
Which again is flipping the perspective again and telling things from Nurse Ratched's perspective. And there's a real trend for books and series like that, and I love it, where you're just flipping the lens. I think that's so important. I also struggled with Midnight's Children. There's a kind of narrative arrogance there, I would argue, with Rushdie.
Yes.
But yeah, I think there is always one that stands out, isn't there? But you can. We're taught now as teachers not to see wrong answers as failures or unexpected answers as failures. That you can always learn something from things like that. So I suppose it's the same with books and films you don't enjoy as well.
Yeah, and again, it's the first book I read by Salman Rushdie, the Satanic Verses, I really found fascinating, and I know there's a huge amount of controversy around that, but as a reading experience, I thought it was brilliant. And then to go to something to go from such a high to a low, I guess it kind of blows it up even further to think like, oh, look at the gap between these two books. It shouldn't be so within that writer. But Rushdie is obviously a complicated character. So like talking about films, I guess, have you seen any films that you appreciated more than the book?
I'm trying to think of that.
That's a hard question.
What I will say is that I did prefer the series of Normal People.
Okay.
That's one, but a series is obviously something you can do a lot more with than a film, just purely from the amount of time you have. I think Harry Potter did a really good job, and as did actually more so as did Lord of the Rings. The Harry Potter, of course, very cinematic. But Lord of the Rings in particular, for what the technology they brought in to create what they did from what Tolkien's idea was, I do think it's a pretty impressive feat. I'm not one of those ones that like I have the first three, we'll say, and I really like them. I know like it's a big commitment if you want to go into the trilogy, like especially the extended editions. You're going 10-hour kind of thing. But I haven't seen the Hobbit ones, and
I thought this is it's kind of a bit ridiculous on my part, and I recognize that. But The Hobbit is a small book, and the films, there's 3 films, and they're all, I don't know, maybe 2.5 hours long. It seems like it's just, to me, it seemed like a money grab, and I didn't want to be part of it, I guess.
Yeah, I did see them sort of, not kind of accidentally a lot of the time. They were on telly, or my friends are going or whatever. Yeah, I completely agree. There was definitely, and it's hard to see after the success of Lord of the Rings how it wasn't a bit of a money grab, and how they mirror it so exactly in terms of the 3 films. And yeah, I mean, the Lord of the Rings, the book is like, it's huge.
Yeah,
it justifies the 3 films, and The Hobbit. Yeah, and there's storylines added, kind of love stories and things like that added. Better looking dwarves than one might expect, and that kind of thing to keep the viewers' interest. So yeah, there's a bit of that to it, I think.
Peter Jackson, though, will always be a big favorite of mine for the Beatles film he made recently, and I mean, it's 8 hours of just joy for me. I brought up the Beatles again. For anyone counting, I think that's twice now. So your favorite authors? You don't have to. You don't. You know. Do you actually have a top 3?
I'm going to make a very kind of nerdy and pernickety distinction here now.
Okay.
So I would have like books that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
But my favorite authors, like, to get into the favorite author category, I have to sort of really love everything I've read of that person. That doesn't mean I've read everything they've written, but everything that I have read, I love, and that I am always willing to read anything that they've written. I probably, top 3 would be difficult for me. I could probably do a top 5.
Go for it.
I talked about this on my page recently, but John Williams, who's an American writer, he died in the 90s, but he sort of did most of his writing in the 60s and 70s. He is just, his 3 novels, Stoner, Butcher's Crossing, and Augustus. I read Stoner when I was 18, and I think going into studying English, that sort of just, it was a reawakening to why I love reading. He's just incredible. It's sort of a quiet style, and it's really immersive, and it's really insightful. It's just psychologically incredible. Other than that, I love Hilary Mantel. Most famous for her Cromwell trilogy, but she writes a lot of historical fiction. Historical fiction is one of my favorite genres, really. Okay. Again, probably in some ways for the kind of escape it offers you, or the immersion it offers you. Yeah. Kevin Barry is absolutely up there. John McGahern is up there, and Elizabeth Hardwicke is another woman. I did my 2 dissertations on John Williams, and the second one I also did on Hardwicke. She was married. She was the second wife of the American poet Robert Lowell. Okay. And he was just a terrible person. But anyway, she's an essayist primarily, and she wrote some kind of memoirs and one memoir and short stories, and those would probably be my top 5. But I'm leaving people out there.
It's when you talk about, actually, when I asked the top three question, I immediately had 4 on my head, so it was kind of a kind of an unfair one. I'll rattle through them. I would have Raymond Carver. I would have Alice Munro, again, 2 short story writers that are just out of this world, kind of. Cormac McCarthy would be pretty high for me. John Steinbeck, and I don't know. The number 5 is kind of, it's a bit. It could be. I don't. People always like frown a little bit on David Foster Wallace for Infinite Jest as being a bit over the top, a bit, whatever they might say about it. But I honestly think his short stories and his nonfiction are incredible. There's a nonfiction book, if people haven't heard of it, called Consider the Lobster, which is a collection of essays, which is just amazing. There's another one called A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. Even if you just want to read the essay that he writes about being on a cruise ship, it's funny. He hates it. He also he wrote an essay on Roger Federer, and even if you don't like tennis, it's one of the greatest essays about a sports person you'll ever read. Just the way he writes about, because he was a tennis player in his youth as well. So I guess there's my 5. That's okay. So again, there's. So you mentioned there about you have your favorite authors, but you have favorite books. So what would be, because I think every reader has a favorite book that they will always go back to.
Yeah, I mean, funny actually that you mentioned Steinbeck there. He falls into that category where he's not quite made it to famous author or favorite author yet, because famous author, he's made that one already. Favorite author, mainly just because I haven't read enough of him.
Yeah.
I have The Grapes of Wrath coming that I'm going to read. But East of Eden is one of my favorite books.
Brilliant, yeah.
It sort of changed my way of seeing things, to be honest. It's an incredible book.
So will Grapes of Wrath, to be honest with you.
I've heard that, so I'm looking forward to it. But you kind of need to be in the humor for Steinbeck, I think.
For sure.
Stoner, again, the book by John Williams, that sort of was life-changing in its way. I have a real nostalgic attachment to both Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. My blog is called Curious Her Books, so that's a nod to Alice in Wonderland. I funnily then with Kevin Barry, I don't actually have a favorite one of his books. It's more just the writing.
Yeah.
But I'd say those four are definitely up there. I actually recently, a recent read was A Ghost in the Throat by Tierney Griffith.
Okay.
And again, I have books of her poetry that I need to get into. I haven't read more of Tierney Griffith's work, but A Ghost in the Throat, again, I found was kind of just incredible, sort of shook my world, to be honest.
That's another thing about, I guess it falls, you could say under all art, but for when we talked about, teachers passing something on, and we had To Kill a Mockingbird on the curriculum or whatever, and that's the right word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we had that, and we had a teacher, Mr. Carberry was his name, and he used to do the accents terribly, but it brought things to life, because again, it's about the love that he had for the writing, and it's ever since we read it when we were maybe 15 or 16, it's been my favorite book. I've read it, I don't know how many times. It's a perfectly written book, and talking about adaptations into films, it's a great film as well. They made a really great film, and Hollywood really did Steinbeck well as well, because East of Eden and The Grapes of Wrath are brilliant films too. And you kind of wonder then, is that a perfect balance of it just being a great director with a vision, or is it the writing is so powerful that it's hard to mess it up? Now, look, I could go and look later on, and I'd find probably a perfect example of something that did happen. But those are the ones kind of left such an impression on me. As people talk about Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is an amazing piece of work, but I would point people to Suttree, which it's so good, and it really brings you into that world. And again, it's like, I kind of like things set in the South, the American South. I find them really fascinating, and the perspectives from the different people and some of the downright awful things that went on there. But yeah, it's about taking you to another place again, and it's wonderful. Do you feel obliged, and this falls under probably Midnight Children, but do you feel obliged to read classics?
Obliged, interesting. Are there, I don't know, obliged probably is the wrong word, maybe. I do feel the weight of that the books you should read kind of thing. And I find it, I suppose I like to make my mind up for myself. I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is often considered a classic, and I didn't like it, but I do love, I also studied classics in school, and I'm a big fan of mythology, so like right back to those classics, to the Iliad, the Aeneid, the epics we have, and then like Dickens, the Brontes, Jane Austen. I do, and Tolstoy. I do love classics, and I think what I find interesting about them is why they're classics, why they've endured, and it's an interesting way to think about what will endure that's being written now. So obliged is a funny word, but definitely, I know what you mean, that there is a sense of, oh, you have to read this, or can you really consider yourself a lover of literature or a reader if you haven't read this? But I do think that can be damaging, because they're intimidating and they're hefty, and if someone feels that that's how they need to get into reading by going straight for War and Peace, That's not ideal.
It's not, and I was skirting my way around them as well. I was going, well, what classics are quite short? And then I go like, I was looking at Dostoevsky's and I read the shorter ones, and like, look, to say you enjoy them is a stretch because they're heavy. Obviously, there's a lot going on in them. And I read like Moby Dick was probably the one that kind of stood out. And I said I have to read Moby Dick. And again, I enjoyed it. Apart from that bit about just the whale anatomy for about 100 pages. It's a struggle, and they're the moments where you're kind of like, you appreciate the writing, that it's how much work went into the work, into the writing. But there's some where I look at them. War and Peace is actually a good shout, where I'm just like, I don't like, although I read, and these are becoming, there'll always be classics, and they're still becoming classics. You mentioned Hilary Mantel, and Wolf Hall is one that I feel I should read. Like Infinite Jest was like, I felt I should read it because I read all the short ones, and then I was like, oh, and it's just, maybe it's just the length of the novel that freaks me out. But you're right, obliged is probably a strong word, but I feel like I need to have an opinion on things like, Moby Dick is as an example, and Satanic Verses was one of those things because I'd heard so much about the controversy of it that I felt, why is it so controversial, and will I be able to pick up the controversy because it's not aimed at me, we'll say. Whether he meant to aim anything at anyone is a different thing. But so there's always these ones that you feel a little bit pressurized to do, and Wolf Hall is one that I think I will read. I know you love historical fiction. It's not something that I'm huge on, but obviously it's very well written.
Wolf Hall's incredible. I will proselytize that book until the day I die.
Well,
I will say on that thing about classics, something that I do, and I don't know if it's helpful to anyone else who sort of wants to read more classics and feels daunted by them. They won't be the only book I'm reading at any given time.
Yeah.
So it means that you're not facing into 1,000+ pages of Tolstoy, and that's the only book you're reading for the foreseeable. It lets you kind of dip in and out when you feel like it, and I think that's much more flexible, and allows you to enjoy it and to put the book down when you're not enjoying it and pick it back up when you think you'll enjoy it again.
It's not like, you don't want it to be a slog. Like, that's the whole point of it. It's to be, and I like to read maybe a fiction and a nonfiction at the same time, so you can go in between. So it's actually a good way of practicing it. People think how can you read 2 or 3 books at the same time? You'd be surprised what you can do if you're into the writing. How have books helped your mental health?
Oh, God, a lot of different ways, I suppose. And in depending on the type of book, again, in different ways. I think fiction has this sort of paradoxical ability. I know I was talking earlier about children can leave themselves behind when they're reading, and they can really immerse themselves in it. And I think that's an amazing thing. And it's when you achieve that as an adult, and it's much rarer, it's such an amazing escape. It's really taking yourself out of your situation, even if just for half an hour or 40 minutes, and that level of escape to put yourself in a new environment, to forget whatever's going on with you and just immerse yourself in the story is incredible. But on the flip side, when you are reading fiction that resonates with you, and that you feel less alone in something that you might be feeling, whether that's heartbreak or grief or just a sort of nebulous melancholy. Kevin Murray's great for that one, the nebulous melancholy. I think that's really helpful as well. So when you can escape yourself, but also when you can see yourself mirrored in the book, it's a weird paradox. And then in terms of nonfiction, I have actually really only in the last 2 years maybe gotten really into nature writing. Like the likes of Robert Macfarlane now is who I see to be the leading proponent of it at the moment. But Kerry Duchtig in Ireland, Tim Robinson's books about Connemara, I think nature writing is incredible because, first of all, it's nearly always so beautiful the way, and some of Cormac McCarthy's prose is almost like nature writing. It's getting right down to brass tacks, the little things you wouldn't necessarily notice. So it's very grounding, I think, in terms of how it helps your mental health. It's very beautiful. So it's like reading poetry. It's just a pleasant aesthetic experience, but also it grounds you in a sense of wider things going on a very small level. It makes you notice like the birds in your garden, or the little wildflowers you pass when you're going for a walk or something like that. It changes your perspective, your frame of mind. And I think that's hugely helpful to me anyway. And then I guess personal essays and poetry are another thing again, and they maybe tap more into what I was saying earlier about seeing your own feelings or struggles or experiences mirrored. I mean, I read a book of essays recently by Brian Dillon. He's an Irish essayist called 9 Hypochondriac Lies.
Okay.
And he talks about his own struggle with health anxiety, with, you know, a specific brand of anxiety that you constantly had this fear of a serious illness, whether that's because someone you love died of it, or just you can't settle, you're just very scared of it. And that's something I'd have experienced at different times in my life. And to see it put into words the way he did was like revolutionary to me.
Yeah.
I didn't know people felt the same way I did, down to such kind of intimate details. So yeah, I think books and poetry as well. I mean, a single line in poetry can floor you that way. Like someone's reached into your soul and just taken it out and put it in a magnifying glass. Yeah, I think reading has helped my mental health anyway in different ways. And one of the reasons I want to be an English teacher and a good English teacher is to sort of make teenagers see that resource is available to them as well. And particularly as they're going to be growing up now more and more with the demands of social media on their time and on their attention and on their self-esteem. Yeah. I
think though, like, that's a great kind of way of seeing things when you see the author kind of mirroring how you feel. And it's an amazing thing for someone actually who's really going through a tough time, whatever mental health issue it might be. And I've definitely seen a lot of writers kind of put back my anxiety and write about anxieties in the way that I feel that I may not have been able to put into words. And it is so reassuring that, you know, you don't want the other people to be going through it, but see that other people are going through it and able to work to a certain point where they can write about it, because that's very difficult as well for any writer to be able to put that out there, because we're all, you know, we all don't want people to know our business. Like, that's just, you know, I suppose a natural thing for us. But when you see someone write that back like you did, it's something that encourages you, I think, to like go on and push on and dig a bit deeper in what it's about. And another kind of thing, when what helps me a lot with writing, and you described it great about the nature writing, and I guess I find this in fiction a lot of the times in short stories, because you can, you know, read one at a time, put the book down or whatever, but there's a mindfulness to it. And I'm reading Louise Kennedy's book now, the End of the World as a Cul-de-sac, and it's a collection of short stories. I can't recommend it enough, but it's one where she's an Irish writer actually, and as you're reading, I always go back to Raymond Carver as an example of a short story writer, but just someone who can write about the most normal things in life, but, like, you know, in 10 pages and make it sound as poetic as he does. I find incredible. But I think what Louise Kennedy is doing in this collection of short stories, it's the same. And I'm having such a mindful experience of it. And I know I've only got 60 pages left. And I'm kind of hoping that the next book I read is as good, or as, you know, I can take as much from it. Like, it's not going to happen all the time, but I think when it comes to reading, to find those moments, to find those books, it's just incredible, you know, the feelings you get from it, and to be moved by someone who's worked, and we know how hard writers have to work to get to where they are. It's just incredible to find those. And it can, you spelt it out beautifully there, but the idea, like, I do think that books are so important to my mental health, and I think art is so important to mental health, and creativity, and to go and, like, if you think, oh, maybe I could write something, go and write it. Like, it's not like you don't have to be Tolstoy, you know, it's not about that. It's about going out and creating things. And it's such a rewarding experience to go out and create anything, I find, you know, just even if you've got some paint and a canvas and a brush, just do something. And, you know, again, it doesn't have to be something that sells in Sotheby's for 60 million. It just has to be a piece that you're proud of. Like, and I always go back to art, but that's why I wanted to bring you on, in particular, Eva, to talk about books the way you have, to spell out to people that this is a brilliant thing to do as a hobby. It's more than a hobby, I think, but people would put it under hobbies, I guess, but it's just such a, you take so much from it, and you get so, you can see from me and you speaking, you get so passionate about these things, and it becomes so important to your life. And I just can't, like, I can't talk it up enough. But when you aren't reading, what else do you like to do in your spare time?
I love running, and I play football badly, which I enjoy as well.
Okay.
So walking, kind of getting out in the fresh air, and I suppose for the same reasons as reading, it kind of takes you away from yourself, or the mindfulness of it. Yeah, those would be big ones for me. I'm very boring.
No, do you know, and everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people say that at the end of it. But I think with the, what you're doing professionally, which would take up your time, and how you're so passionate about reading, and you've got the blog. I mean, it's not, to me, that's just the way what you do, and going out running as well, like, which is obviously, I love to just mention how important it is to my mental health as well. That mindfulness, and be able to go out there and walking, and I wouldn't describe it as boring at all. Are you feeling, this is a terrible final question. Are you feeling optimistic about 2022?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
On the whole, I think.
Yeah. Do you mean in the scape? Because I guess I'm kind of asking more personally. Like, I mean, like, you can't account for what's going to happen around us with everything that's going on, but like professionally and personally for you.
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. I'm really looking forward to progressing more with my teaching training, and yeah, I think we see a light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic, or even if it is going to rumble on, that we've developed ways of coping, and we will continue to develop ways of coping that will just allow people to lead less fearful lives, less anxious lives. And yeah, I think I'm broadly optimistic. It's
Good.
tough,
Yeah.
and news will constantly wind you, but I think so. Are you?
Yeah, do you know, I am, and again, it's about that idea of we can't see what's going on around, but there is chinks of light going on there, and I think as obviously you're into art and reading and things like that, I think that never stops, and there's always things to look forward to in that. So in our personal lives, it's important to have those kind of hobbies. Like, you can still do your thing, whether it's working out, reading, watching films, whatever it is. I have this podcast I'm really enjoying. I like having people on who talk, about their passions, but also what mental health, how their passion can help their mental health. So yeah, I guess I am, and I think the books will never stop, and that's that is really good. Where can people find your blog, actually, Eva?
So yeah, on Instagram under Curiouser Books is probably the best way. And there's a link on that page to the website with the longer form reviews if you have a whole lot of time to think.
Well, I would fully recommend it as well, because sometimes it's great if you've read the book to, like I said, get the opinion of others, but sometimes it's great to be led towards reading a book that maybe you were thinking about, but you hadn't quite made up your mind. So I think it's great to we'll put the links up as well when the episode's out as well. It has been an absolute pleasure this Saturday morning, Eva, to chat to you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Could you stay for a minute? Just I'll finish this off, and I'll get a photo, and then we'll go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Listen, I want to also say thank you very much to John Francis for all his technical work on the podcast. Also to Nathan Dunn for promotion and getting it out there. It's been very helpful. I always thank the people who have made me and helped me with the podcast. So I thank my mom, my dad, my granddad, Jaron Calvin. Subscribe to YouTube. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the Wheatley. And there's one that's the Wheatley, which really bothers my OCD. We're on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. There's a few more. I know I said for my New Year resolution, I'll learn the other ones, but I haven't done so yet. Listen, thanks everyone for listening. And Eva, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next week, everyone. Take care. Bye.